I'm Lon Milo Duquette, and when I'm not evoking demons, I'm watching the Caine interviews on Cat TV Fayetteville.
Hello, I'm Shannon Caine. Today on the Caine Interviews, we'll be talking with Lon Duquette, an internationally recognized occult author. We'll be talking about tarot, ceremonial magic, and other occult-related topics. He is currently on tour promoting a book that he's written on the Crowley Tarot deck. Mr. Duquette, welcome to the show.
Thank you for asking me.
All right, well, let's begin with a brief discussion of the O.T.O. In what capacity are you involved with the O.T.O., and could you tell us a little bit about the organization?
No, it's secret.
Oh.
Actually, it is a secret organization, but much like the Masons are a secret organization.
Right.
Okay. The O.T.O. is a magical society. It's based sort of along the lines of Freemasonry. Mm-hmm. It's about 100 years old, and I'm currently the U.S. Deputy Grand Master. And there's about 3,000 people worldwide, and it's probably the oldest continually operating magical society in the world.
Okay. Now, the O.T.O. Was founded by Aleister Crowley. What became of the O.T.O. after Crowley's death?
Actually, it wasn't created by Aleister Crowley. The Ordo Templi Orientis was in existence prior to Crowley being a member of it. He was initially given leadership of it in the English-speaking countries around 1913, 1914. And later, as things developed and people died, he assumed the world leadership of it eventually. Crowley died in 1947, and there were very few members of the O.T.O. still alive at that time. And by the time I joined in 1975, I believe there were 5 living members left.
Okay. Now, you've authored several books on occultism. Could you name some events in your life that most intensely prompted your interest in occultism?
The 60s.
Okay.
I graduated from high school in 1966, moved to California to go to college, and then I quit college a year or so after that so I could attend the 60s. Mm-hmm. And I was involved in all of the sort of mind-expanding activities that were famous for that era. Mm-hmm. And I soon got interested in Eastern mysticism, and for a few years I fancied myself as a yogi. And but either because I was too young or too lazy, I figured that I was trying to play Eastern software on Western hardware. Right. And I began looking around for something in the West that was more harmonious with the Western psyche, that was the equivalent of Eastern mysticism. And I eventually found it in ceremonial magic and Kabbalah-based Hermeticism.
Okay. Now, you have a strong interest in tarot, particularly in the Crowley deck. But let's talk about tarot for beginners, for somebody who's just getting started. Is there any particular deck that you would recommend for somebody who's just starting off?
Oh, the classic deck is the Waite deck. It was designed by Arthur Edward Waite at the beginning of the 20th century, and it was executed by a marvelous artist, Pamela Coleman Smith. And those images are the images that people most associate with the tarot, and it's a perfect beginning tarot deck, and it gets you used to seeing how the the deck is organized and the archetypal images of the trumps. So,
Okay.
and that's the most popular one. You can go into a little New Age bookstore or a specialty shop or any large chain and get yourself a copy of the weight deck.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's called the Rider weight deck, but Rider is the name of the publisher.
Ah, okay.
So, but that's the perfect deck.
Okay. Well, do you regard tarot as a spiritual journey in itself as opposed to a mere divination tool?
Yes, I do, but you don't necessarily have to view it that way yourself. It's a wonderful divinatory tool in and of itself because in a way it is perfect. In the same way as the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, the Chinese Book of Changes, famous oracle, those images in their own way are mathematically perfect. And for purposes of divination, it's easy to, or it's easier to get an answer from something that is perfect or approaching perfection. Actually, if you're ready for the answer, you've already set up all of the mechanism to receive that answer. And you can see that answer in any observed phenomena if you're open to it. But it's easier to see that in something that's perfect. That's why people get inspired by looking at beautiful things, because beauty is perfection. And in its own way, the tarot is one of those perfect vehicles, and that's why it's so easily used for divinatory purposes.
Okay. Now, Lady Frieda Harris did the artwork on the Crowley deck. With all the attention that has been given to Crowley as a personality, would you say that Lady Harris's contribution has been somewhat underestimated?
Well, yes and no. Obviously, the artwork, the stunning artwork of the Thoth Tarot, that's the deck that she and Crowley worked on together. The artwork itself is all her baby. And it's wonderful, sort of very modern, cubist, stunningly beautiful. So beautiful that when I first looked at a deck of Thoth cards, I was scared. It was so pretty. I thought, well, only the devil could make something so pretty, And like Paganini, the violinist, he played violin so well that they thought, well, only the devil can make sounds like that. Well, when I looked at that tarot deck, I thought, oh, only the devil could make something so beautiful. But Harris worked extremely close with Crowley on the project, and it was Harris's idea to do the deck. It wasn't Crowley's idea, and this is a big misconception that Crowley Svengali'd her into doing this massive, monumental project. But it was her idea. She was his magical student, and she knew that he was near death, and that for him to leave the world with the wisdom of his 70-some odd years, and they were very odd years, that she would like him to distill his wisdom into one last book. And she wanted him to structure that book along these perfect lines of the way the tarot is organized. And she tried to lure him into the project by saying, I will make you 78 paintings to go with this. And he turned her down. He says it's a big project. Understandably, he was tired. And she finally made him an offer he couldn't refuse. She paid him a weekly stipend or a weekly fee to teach her magic, write that book, and she would illustrate it. She has sort of been overshadowed by the personality of Aleister Crowley in the years since then. But when the cards were first exhibited as paintings, Crowley's name didn't even come up. Nobody said that Crowley designed these cards. She didn't include his name in any of the program guides or anything else. So at first, these were Frieda Harris's works. This was her magnum opus. And so she overshadowed Crowley early on while they both lived. Neither of them lived to financially profit from the cards. And it was only in the late 60s that the cards were properly photographed, or the paintings were properly photographed and turned into cards.
Okay. Now, you've written this whole book on the Thoth Tarot. Why is this particular deck so important? Why wasn't your book on the Waite deck or the Hermetic Tarot or some other deck?
Well, there's tons of books on those subjects. The Thoth Tarot in any given year is the second most popular and best-selling tarot deck in the world. It is, with the Rider-Waite deck, truly the second most popular and recognizable deck in the world. People that don't know anything about Aleister Crowley or Lady Harris don't know or care anything about magic. They have and use these cards. It's second only to the Rider-Waite deck in popularity among professional tarot readers. If you see people reading tarot cards on television shows or in movies, they're likely to be using the Thoth Tarot deck. Everybody who owns that deck would like to know a little more about it. And Crowley wrote a book, called The Book of Thoth, which was the companion text to the cards. But Crowley's writing is so postgraduate in style that it's almost impossible for someone who isn't already well versed in Hebrew Kabbalah, comparative religion, etc., to get anything out of the text at first. And it requires a lot of study. It requires you to be well versed in all forms of Hermeticism. I mean, it's a postgraduate text. And so what I've done is, after about 30 years of wading through the Thoth Tarot and the Book of Thoth, I tried to write the book that I wished that I would have read at first to make the Thoth Tarot and the Book of Thoth more accessible. So that's why I was asked to write it. So.
Okay. Now, Crowley said a number of rather outrageous things during his lifetime. What are some of his more inflammatory and misunderstood statements?
Oh man, we could be here all night. Okay, you have to remember, Crowley was a Crowley was a genius, and often geniuses don't realize that other people aren't geniuses too. He had a very, very eccentric, wild, and perverse sense of humor. That notwithstanding, he usually assumed that anyone who really mattered would see through what he was saying. Okay, here's an example. Crowley was a world-class mountaineer. He made and broke several mountain climbing records in his lifetime. His record of camping on the Baltoro Glacier of K2 at a certain altitude without oxygen has yet to be broken. People who don't know anything about Crowley in any other capacity know that Crowley was a world-famous adventurer and mountaineer. During one of his climbs, he hired a group of Sherpas, native porters, to help with the expedition, and they were the same group that had mutinied and killed a European party 2 years previous. It was the only guys available. Okay. During the climb, he and two of them went ahead to sort of scout out the next day's climb, and the classic ice bridge collapsed and the two Sherpas fell to their death. And Crowley was faced with the chance, he was faced with the ordeal of going back into camp and say, hey, the next day's climb is so dangerous that two of you guys got killed. He knew that if he came back with that news that they would mutiny and kill his party as well. So he did something insanely outrageous and something only a guy like Crowley would come up with, When he went back, he laughed and said that he had killed and eaten both of the Sherpas during the climb. And the superstitious remaining Sherpas were so freaked at this. Now, I don't know if they believed him or if they just thought he was so insane that they just this guy can do anything. Nevertheless, it saved the climb, and they weren't killed. But word got back to the Alpine Club and other people who were amateur climbers that Crowley had killed and eaten 2 of his Sherpas. And so when they got back to India and were questioned by reporters, one reporter asked, "Is it true, Mr. Crowley, that you killed and ate 2 of your Sherpas?" And Crowley did what probably you and I would do if someone asked something that bizarre. He said, "Yes, I did." Okay, so from that day on, he was called a cannibal, and he kind of enjoyed that, So he never denied that. But in his real writings, his spiritual writings, and he was one of the few Westerners to get into Eastern mysticism and such, including Tantra Yoga and the various exercises of sexual yoga and sexual magic. In those days, and when I say those days, I'm talking about from the 19-teens up through the 40s. In those days, you could not talk about sexual matters in any other way except in a medical way. And you certainly didn't discuss sexual matters in any religious context whatsoever. But what you could talk about is human sacrifice, bloody sacrifices, ritualistic murder, things like that. So Crowley, in his 1923 Magic and Theory and Practice, wanted to write about one of these sexual techniques. And it's an important subject, and it needed to be discussed. But because he couldn't talk about it straightforwardly, he thought everybody's going to see right through this. I will replace certain human bodily fluids with the word blood, and I will replace the word ecstasy, with the word kill, death, sacrifice, and such. So he wrote this incredibly ill-conceived, if we can use that word, chapter on the bloody sacrifice, when really he was talking about just a technique of sexual magic that you can find in any Brentano bookstore today, And he was even cautioned by his friends and disciples, please tell him you're not really saying what you're saying. And so he wrote this wonderful introduction that says, I'm not saying what I'm saying. And he even included another little footnote from another disciple that says, he's not really saying what, you're going to get in big trouble here if you do this. But see, that stuck. And even just a few months ago, I was channel surfing past a religious TV network, and I saw this picture of Aleister Crowley on, so I stopped and listened. And they're still quoting this as, yes, he killed babies and ate them. And when people ask him that, of course, he would say, oh, sure, I did that all too, yes. Thinking that everybody's getting the joke, and everybody didn't get the joke. Mm-hmm. Okay.
So a lot of his more inflammatory statements were probably things that were obviously meant to be couched in metaphor. And
absolutely.
Sure.
But that's not to say that he wasn't an outrageous character too. And almost every bad thing that you can read about Crowley probably had a little scrap of truth in it. He was sort of an Oscar Wilde, bisexual, omnisexual person in an age where no one even discussed the closet,
right,
let alone those things.
Okay. Now, magic can kind of seem perplexing or even stuffy at times to the uninitiated. What is it about the occult that can sometimes lead to a sense of pompousness or condescension among some of its practitioners?
There's two types of people that are interested in magic and occultism, It's people who are really serious spiritual seekers on one hand, and people who are running away from themselves on the other hand. And occultism fills the need for both of those people. Unfortunately, the people who are running away from themselves, there are many more of them than there are the serious serious practitioner and the serious student. And so it's a wild combination of people who at any given time are interested in this. And instead of using magic for illumination, it's easy to use the same techniques up to a point for ego gratification, ego inflation, and like so many other philosophies and studies and spiritual practices, there's an element of people who go just bonkers, okay? And usually they're the ones that you hear about the most.
Right. The nuts as ever get all the coverage.
That's right.
So a person of the sort who would be, as you said, running away from themselves, how far can such a person really get in magic? Would one go very far?
No.
And now I've often heard that magic requires or it is helpful to have a basic grasp on psychology. Do you think psychology is important to magic?
Yes, magic in a way, classical magic is we could almost say it's medieval psychology. Yes, it's very helpful to have a good grounding in psychology. It's not particularly helpful to dissect absolutely everything in magic in psychological terms, because magic is a spiritual art form, and part of the art form is buying into this wonderful, colorful, magical world, if you will. And for the purpose of actually performing magic, the magician suspends for a moment their point of view that all of this is psychological and all of this is in my head, because the reason that the magic works is that for a moment, for a brief period of time, you suspend that and deal with these natural forces as if they were a spiritual hierarchy of deities, angels, archangels, spirits, and intelligences. After the operation is complete and the magician is writing in the diary, of course, then all the psychological aspects come in and they see things from that more balanced point of view.
But during a working, you could not depend solely on rationalism, or you wouldn't get very far, I suppose.
Right.
You have to have that willing suspension of momentary disbelief, or maybe a full engagement of one's belief, on the other hand. You can't look at it all in strict Western logical terms while
Right.
you're doing the operation. You could go back, perhaps, and, as you said, after the fact, and then dissect it, as it
Right.
were. Okay. Now, some occult books seem terribly verbose and inaccessible. Crowley himself may be one of those writers that's difficult for many people to get a grasp on. So do you feel that you're working in some way to change that tradition to make magic more accessible to the average person?
Yes, that's sort of my job at the moment, at least as I see it. But just because I'm making it more accessible, it's to make it more accessible for people who will eventually have a chance to get into it very, very deeply themselves. And if they don't want to do that, if they're not inclined to go in deep, at least they have a cursory understanding of it. And the more people that know that it's not the hideous, freaky thing, the better. Whether they dedicate their lives to working magic or not. Magic will always be difficult. There's no need to make it extra difficult by forcing people to go on scavenger hunts for unpublished books and fool traps and going down blind alleys that in the years past have been the natural governors that have kept the nuts out of magic. Mm-hmm. It seems like people had a lot more time on their hands, 300 years ago, and things like going on wild goose chases, getting black pullets and eyes of newt and things like that, more or less were intended not as a practical thing for doing magic, but just to see if a person is subtle enough to say, "That's crazy. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that," And so we're a little bit more sophisticated. We are in a new age, and if I've made things easier, please don't assume that I've made it so easy that magic will never be hard.
Well, again, there's a way of simplifying without reducing it or without dumbing it down. The information would be useful, but presented in a way that the average person could find it accessible. And what occult authors other than Crowley have you found particularly influential?
Oh, gee. Prior to getting involved with Crowley, and once you've had Crowley, nobody else satisfies quite like Crowley. But I was introduced to occultism through a wonderful series of books by a guy who wrote under the name of Yogi Ramacharaka. And Yogi Publications publishes his works. Actually, he was an Englishman named William Walker Atkinson. And those books were very influential. And Paramahansa Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi, and my wife and I studied the Kriya Yoga material prior to me being interested in this. But there's just other very non-threatening kind of occult authors. Paul Foster Case, who was the head of an organization called Builders of the Adytum. His material is very good, especially where it concerns the Kabbalistic and the Tarot aspects of magic. The works of Israel Regardie, who was Crowley's secretary for a while, and he was very influential in my magical career. And I met and I knew regarding his last years, and he was the first one to show me that magic really was a psychological art form.
He was himself a Reichian therapist.
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, and a Reichian therapist, but he had great respect for Jung too, and so he showed me that a normal person could still be involved in this stuff and remain a normal person, and so I enjoy his works too. The classic things, the Golden Dawn material, mm-hmm. and a woman named Dion Fortune. That's all very good stuff, and it's sort of the classic books that I find in the libraries of all my friends.
Mm-hmm. What sorts of, just a couple of items, what would you recommend for an absolute beginner?
For an absolute beginner? Well, I wrote a biography, mm-hmm. okay, that doesn't have a great deal of technical information about magic, but just sort of is an introduction to how magic could be used in a relatively normal person's lifestyle. Okay, so it's an easy read, and it's really the only book of its kind. You know, I know it sounds very. I'm promoting my own book, but that's why I wrote it. You know, there wasn't one, and
The book we're talking about, incidentally, is called My Life with the Spirits.
And that, my wife is not too crazy about my face on the cover. But anyway, it would show you whether or not magic might be for you, or if you might be interested in learning more. Because why are you doing this stuff? Okay, that's the big question. Sure, it's a spiritual art form. Sure, it's this. Sure, you wear funny robes and clothes and have wands and cups and swords and spears, and you deal with pesky demons and you invoke archangels and stuff. But why the heck do you do that? Okay, why would a sane person want to do that? And I try to put it in perspective that this is as a legitimate spiritual path as Buddhism or Zen or any of the other great practical hands-on spiritual practices around. And so for the very, very beginner, I'd recommend that. It's funny too, because I'm the biggest klutz in the world. I mean, I did a 2-week ceremony to consecrate my wand, and then the first morning that I was going to use my wand, I accidentally sit on it and snap it in two. I'm a very human, very pitiful magician, and I've managed to survive so far relatively intact.
Okay. Now, could you explain for us the difference between ceremonial magic and paganism?
Well, paganism is more or less a general worldview that puts one in harmony with nature and the cycles of nature, and it has aspects of ceremonial magic in it, the classic casting of the circle and the calling down of the deities and elements of the quarters. All that's classic ceremonial magic techniques. So in a way, there's very ceremonial magic is a bit more in the head and less in the garden. And but I know many pagans and neo-pagans who are Thelemites and into ceremonial magic. And so instead of harking back to a time either real or imagined when people were in harmony with the earth and such, ceremonial magic more or less puts the individual at the center of the individual's universe. And although we deal with and try to harmonize and balance ourselves with nature and the natural forces, we're really trying to take control of our own universe and gain enlightenment in just a little bit more technical, I guess, in a technical way. So I don't resonate, extremely well with the pagan thing. We go to all of the ceremonies and the seasonals and such, but there's a certain amount of I don't want to say prejudice, but there's a bias among the pagan community sometimes about ceremonial magicians, because we deal with these Enochian tablets and all sorts of strange things that really takes the magic out of the garden.
Yeah, yes. Now, you mention particularly in your book, My Life with the Spirits, recounting some humorous things or some things that backfired. How important is humor in magic? And can humor be incorporated into one's magical workings?
I think it has to be. I think if you've lost your sense of humor, you've lost your ability to really be a magician. You mentioned the sort of crazy people that that are into magic and are very vocal and very visible. Most of those people, you will be hard pressed to find any element of humor or self-examination, for that matter. Who was it that said, that an unexamined life isn't worth leading? Well, if you examine your life and are true to yourself, you either got to think it's funny or I'm sorry. There's life is funny, and if you can't laugh at yourself, you won't be able to go truly far in magic, at least in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, in your youth, you were somewhat traumatized by exposure to a rather oppressive and joyless form of Christianity. Do you feel that Christianity is a spiritually viable belief, or has its time really come and gone?
Well, I don't like to, criticize, a faith that people hold dear. And if Christianity is working for a person as far as their own personal happiness and their own personal spiritual development, I'm all for it. I'm all for it also if they choose to worship frogs and other, if that's making them happy, even though I'm not a big frog worshiper myself. I'm happy to say that I think they're doing their magic and they're doing their will, and all power to them. As far as Christianity being a thing whose time has come and gone, I believe that with my whole heart.
I see. Do you think that there's any remnant of magic still remaining in Christianity? For instance, the ceremony of the Roman Catholic Mass.
Sure. And when I say it's a thing that's time has come and gone, I don't mean to throw the baby out with the bathwater. When ages change and magical formulas change and humanity's consciousness evolves, we don't completely throw away all the things that work pretty well for us in the past. We just tweak them a little bit. The Roman Catholic Mass and the Eucharistic ceremonies of the Orthodox and Eastern churches is, by anyone's definition, except perhaps the church itself's definition, is an act of ceremonial magic, and a most beautiful and efficacious piece of ceremonial magic at that. It is a wonderful thing. The Eucharist is an incredible magical ceremony. Even the Roman Catholic Mass is. To take an inert substance or two inert substances and charge them and make them God and then eat them is fabulous. It's magic of the highest order. And if we would strip away all of the doctrine and the silliness and the inquisitions and things like that, and just stuck with that magical ceremony of making inert substances God and then eating them, we'd be in great shape. The O.T.O has within its body a church in itself, just like the Knights Templars were sort of a church unto themselves. They had their own confessors and such. Ordo Templi Orientis has a church within the order called Ecclesia Gnostica Catholica, or the Gnostic Catholic Church. And we have a Eucharistic ceremony, very, very similar to the Roman and Orthodox Masses, only we also use a priestess and a priest, okay, just to sort of bring in the other 50% of the world's population and consciousness. And we have a Eucharistic ceremony, and it's magic too. So Protestant services seems to have stripped away a lot of the ceremonial aspects of magic. Sing a few songs, and every once in a while, I don't know how many times a year it is, they sort of they chop up some Wonder Bread and drink this little sticky grape juice out of these little sticky glasses.
With the exception of the Episcopalians.
Yes, bless them. but they're almost embarrassed about the Eucharist. They don't believe that it's real magic. They don't really believe it's the flesh of God and the blood of God. As a matter of fact, as far as the communion is concerned, they just don't believe. They just
I think
got to do it.
with some of the some of the Protestant bodies, it may be a backlash from Luther's Reformation.
Sure.
In terms of, they did throw the baby out with the bathwater in terms of wanting to get rid of anything that smacked of papism.
Right.
They kind of did away with a lot of the fundamentals of Christianity.
Right. Yeah, get rid of the indulgences, but hey, keep that Eucharist. The Mass is pretty swell.
Okay. Well, now, as we've mentioned, you have your book, My Life with the Spirits. And so let's talk about the spirits. Any or all of them. Can we here on Earth communicate with otherworldly entities?
We're doing it right now. Okay. So it's just a matter of, do we have to actually see them, to be dealing with them? We're always dealing with a hierarchy of spirits, known and unknown. Could you hand me my book there? Okay, well, what has just happened is a full-blown magical evocation. Okay, it was my will that this book fly over here to me so I could put it in my hands. And what I did was I did a conjuration. Will you please hand me that book? Okay, and so that went unseen. Okay, to your and then you set into motion a whole hierarchy of muscles and nerves and everything to bring that, and we overcame great forces of nature, gravity, the angel Gravity-al, the huge archangel. You overcame that with your spirits, okay, your various spirits, to keep that book from falling until it got to me. So all spirit communication is dealing with natural forces that someday we'll probably be able to actually measure and weigh on scales and things. So that just because we can't see it doesn't mean that it isn't natural. Now, in a real life evocation where a magician stands inside a circle like Christopher Lee and has a triangle, and he whips a demon up from the so-called infernal regions. Sometimes the magician can actually see the spirit, and it looks like an objective thing, and you're talking with it, and it talks back, and it seems like it's got a mind of its own, and you argue with it and tell it to go do whatever you want, bewitch your neighbor's cow, or whatever the thing is. And then you give it its license to depart, and it goes off and does its own thing. And it either does what you tell it to do, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't do what you tell it to do, you call it up again, and you say, "You've been bad. In other words, you're getting control over something truly inside yourself that you've never had control of before. And if it's not going to work for you, you just say, well, you're working against me, so I will banish you, kind of thing. Now, just because the spirit appears in that triangle, and the triangle appears to be outside of yourself, it really, for magical purposes, isn't outside of yourself. For magical purposes, you may as well fall into the point of view that there is no outside of yourself. That everything that you can perceive, that every kind of impression that ever comes into you, you're going to have to take ultimate responsibility about how you handle that impression, how you handle that force. So it's the weirdest things can qualify as being called a spirit. And the magician's job is to find a spirit within themselves or in the world, doesn't matter, okay, that they haven't had control of before. Their life isn't perfect, it isn't harmonious or balanced because there's a little talent or ability that's running around uncontrolled inside ourselves. And if we could just get that, trap it in a circle or trap it in a triangle, and reorder it. Somebody that learns to play a musical instrument is grabbing a demon that says, "No, I don't want to learn to play it. I don't want to do the discipline. I don't want to take the time. I don't want." Still, every musician that has mastered their instrument has captured a demon and put it to work for them. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And so you, in your book, have chronicled evoking a number of different types of spirits within your lifetime. On the whole, would you say that these spirits have proven to be beneficial to you?
Sure, even the ones that give me trouble. As a matter of fact, especially the ones that give me trouble. In a way, in what the book sort of points out, you learn more from your mistakes and your missteps in magic than you do from your successes. Because if you do something successful, what have you learned? Oh, I can do that. But if it blows up in your face, you go, oh, what do I have to do to change to make this work?
Okay. Now, this may be a tall order, but can you tell us a bit about Enochian magic? And I realize it's a profoundly complex field of occult study, but is there any way that you could explain it for us in a somewhat abbreviated form for those who may be unfamiliar with the topic?
Oh, absolutely. It's simplicity itself. Enochian magic. Queen Elizabeth I had a court magician. Mm-hmm. She had her own Merlin, a guy named Dr. John Dee. He was a Renaissance Elizabethan magus, the smartest guy in England. He was a child prodigy, mathematician. Truly was the smartest guy in England. Had the biggest library in England. And it was not illogical for a guy that everyone else in the universe comes to for answers to questions. When he still has questions, where is he going to go to? And it was logical that for a man like that to go right to God. Just go directly to God. Or God's angels, just like the prophet Enoch did. Okay? So in those days, that didn't seem too weird. So he set to work to actually set up a device or to set up a program of magical practices whereby he could access the mind of God through the intermediary angels. And after a while, it appears that he succeeded. And he made contact through an incredibly bizarre clairvoyant named Edward Kelly, and they set to work over a 5-year period of intense daily magical practices, talking with angels through a black obsidian mirror, which still exists in the British Museum. I tried to jumpstart it just back in December. Didn't work. And a smoky crystal. These angels taught Dee and Kelly a language. And they did it in the most bizarre and roundabout way. And it is a real language with grammar and syntax and everything else. And by the use of this language, you can get the attention of these angels and either, depending on the nature of the operation, go to their environment. Okay, and it's the universe, okay? It's not like, you can go to their environment and find out how the universe ticks from their point of view, or you can bring them into your environment and talk to them, ask them questions and such. And the material that enables you to do that has survived from that period till today, and there is a whole body of Enochian material that gives you enough information to actually set up and start practicing Enochian magic in just a few hours to do the preliminary things. So it is the cleanest form of ceremonial magic that I've yet to encounter, because we're not dealing with the so-called infernal spirits of your own, as the Kabbalists would say, your own nepish. You're dealing with sections, subdivisions, and subdivisions of subdivisions of the natural world around us. So it's a very unique and wonderful and seemingly complex form of ceremonial magic. And what's really unique about it is that it works.
Would you recommend it in any way for somebody just starting it with no prior occult training?
It wouldn't hurt. People say, "Oh, stay away from Enochian magic because it's so." If you're inclined to do that, make that the first thing you learn. It'll be very impressive to your magical neighbors.
Okay. Now, in your autobiography, you discuss the use of drugs and how they were incorporated into your spirituality during the 1960s. What would be your current position on a combination of drugs and mysticism?
I don't want to encourage anyone to take any illegal substances, period. Okay, and back in the 60s, coming from where I was coming straight out of 10 years in Nebraska and the trauma of all of that, I sort of needed a bit of shock treatment to show me that there was something else in the world besides material things. Mm-hmm. I was a very material guy, and my first psychedelic experiences showed me, there is a bigger universe out there, and out there is in my head. Okay, so that just opened the doors of all of this inquiry into Eastern mysticism and such. But I immediately started a search for techniques that didn't require these substances, and it's been many years since I've had anything stronger than a martini. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't, and the strength and such of these substances today, were far greater than mine. But I always entered into it with a spirit of almost scientific exploration. I did the setting thing of Leary and Alpert, and tried to keep notes, and I didn't use it for recreational purposes as such.
Okay, so you could say maybe that that drugs could be a tool toward magical knowledge, but it's one tool among a great many tools.
Right. They're the tool and not the machine itself.
Okay. Do any spiritual paths aside from ceremonial magic intrigue you?
Oh yeah. Well, just because you're a ceremonial magician doesn't mean that you're not open to other kinds of spiritual things that you resonate to. Mm-hmm. I'm not usually a devotional kind of guy. That's why I was so interested in ceremonial magic. But a person has to have that devotional aspect to them recognized and given a vehicle to express itself. And so when I try to open up this right hemisphere and say, I just want to be devotional to God, I just want, which is my holy guardian angel, which is what I eventually want to meld into in my final moments of spiritual existence. When I try to picture a God that I can go into its presence and say, "Hi there, I really thanks a lot for paying my rent this week," and such. I love the image and the character of the Hindu god Ganesha. And so as far as the spiritual practice, other than strict ceremonial magic, I'm a devotee in a way of Ganesha, and obviously I would like a fat god.
Okay, now what do you feel are some of the most important advances in magic within the past century?
Oh, past century, Aleister Crowley and the dawn of the new Aeon, where the magical formula has shifted from the sacrificial formula of the previous Aeon and the dying God formula, where we think the sun went up or died and had to be reborn. That's all shifted, and whether the bulk of the world's population realizes that a magical shift in formula has just occurred sort of at the turn of the century, it doesn't matter whether anyone recognizes that fact or not. It is a fact. We know now that the sun stays on all the time, and the sun doesn't die and come back, and so there's been a massive shift in consciousness of the planet, whether everyone wants to admit this or not, that the individual is the basic unit of human society now, not the family, not the church, not the country, the individual. We're like that sun that stays on all the time. So to me, that's the biggest advance. As a matter of fact, that Thoth Tarot deck that Crowley and Harris created, it was like the visual expression of that shift. There's a couple little things that are different in the Thoth Tarot that are different from the old Aeon tarot decks, and it's a very interesting story in how that is made manifest, and I've tried to tell that story in the book.
Okay, well, we've been talking with Lon Duquette, and he's the author of several really intriguing books on occultism, including My Life with the Spirits, and we have the Magic of Aleister Crowley, and his most current book, Understanding Aleister Crowley's Thoth Tarot. This is the Caine Interviews. Thanks for watching. I'm Shannon Caine.